This is a story called Stories of the Holocaust Part 2. Harry Kirsch, a detail of history, Auschwitz, a matter of survival. We were all in the hall and we were told to get undressed and to leave our clothes and belongings in front of us. All the photos that I had left of my family, which were my only link to home, were taken away, and I stood in the large hall and cried. There were many black days during the war, but this day was by far one of the blackest for me. That day all of my friends from the orphanage, Heinig, Shaimi, the beautiful Genia, Peter and Heinz, all of the children I was friends with in the place where I was really happy were sent to their deaths. Every one of us was led from the hall to the showers. We were then taken to another camp which was in Birkenau, and it was known as Sagena Lager Gypsy Camp. Before we arrived, the camp had housed 4,500 gypsies and their families. However, one day the gypsies were brought together by the Germans. They gave them food for a journey to make them think that they were going to a work camp. Then lorries took them to their death in the gas chambers. Disease was everywhere in the Sagena Lager, and everyone walked around like lost sheep. The Germans stripped us of all our human dignity, and the food that they gave us was just enough to keep us alive. It was meant to be soup, but it was made more like dirty water. All the prisoners looked like human skeletons, walking around the compounds. Some had swollen legs and bodies because of the lack of food. The daily roll calls usually lasted for several hours, and during this time prisoners would collapse from exhaustion. Prisoners were that hungry that there wasn't a blade of grass to be seen because they'd eaten it all. They'd eaten it. Every day, in addition to the horror, we saw the new arrivals burning. Every day, in addition to the horror, we saw the new arrivals burning in crematoriums. I knew that was happening because the capo foreman had told me what happened to the people who went to the left. On a daily basis, we could see clouds of smoke belching out of the chimneys, and the smell of burning flesh was awful. Auschwitz camp was liberated on the 27th of January 1945, just 9 days after we marched to Germany. Journey, Ruth Bennett, are we there yet? I was born in Berlin in January 1935, and my parents called me Ruth Barnett. Our family was quite well off because my father was a young lawyer and my grandmother owned her own cinema advertising business. When my parents first got married, my mother was a secretary and she helped to run the family business. Me and my brother Martin, who was 3 years older than me, used to play together a lot. Until I was 4 years old, we were just an ordinary German family. Things changed when Hitler came to power in Germany, and all of the Jewish people were in a lot of danger. Thankfully, my father, who was Jewish, managed to escape just in time to Shanghai, China, which was one of the few countries Jews could go. My mother was relatively safe because she wasn't Jewish. However, when the Germans were told that if they were married to Jews they had to divorce them by the Nazis, my mother took part in a protest. This resulted in all other protesters being arrested. My mother hid in Germany during the war and she never spoke to me about what happened to her. It was obvious that my mother and father were really worried about what might happen to Martin and me. As a result of this, they made a very difficult decision to send us away on the kinder transport, which is children's transport, to England. I didn't have a clue that this was going to happen. Martin told me that he knew because he was given English lessons. I remember we went in a car which I presume was a taxi, and it just felt like we were going on an outing, which I found very exciting. When we went to the station, I remember throwing a paddy because we were right next to Berlin Zoo, and I wanted to go there instead of going to England. I was left feeling like I was a bad girl because I kicked up a fuss. I remember the train journey took forever and I got fed up. All I kept saying was, "Are we there yet?" I remember when we were getting on the boat, I was scared it wouldn't float because there were thousands of people getting on. However, I was reassured by my brother, and that's that pattern all the way through our time in England without our parents. Everything that my brother said made everything okay. The last words that our parents said to Martin was, "Look after your little sister. Jane Martha blamed a child alone." I was born in 1930 in Vienna, which is the capital of Austria, and my name is Martha Blend. Both parents came from Poland originally, but they met and got married in Vienna. They were both Jewish, but they weren't very religious. When I was a little girl, I loved to play with my Wendy house and my little print blonde doll that I brought with me to England. I absolutely loved the school I went to in Vienna, especially when we sang. I was very proud to give the other kids books when I was made cupboard monitor. Gretty was my best friend at school. Her and her family were Catholic, although it didn't really matter in those days. Up until the Hitler times, we were really close friends. After Austria was invaded by the Germans in 1938, the atmosphere completely and totally changed. We were in for a very hard time and we all knew it. Lots of people read in the newspapers about how all the Jews of Germany were being treated by Hitler. I'd picked up vibes of fear from hearing the grown-ups mention names like Hitler and Gestapo, the Nazi secret police. My parents tried desperately to emigrate to another country. Every country that could have taken us in were only letting a limited amount of refugees in. Before our turn came, it would have taken years. Life changed completely in Austria. It didn't matter where you went, all you ever saw were flags with swastikas and all the men in uniform wearing swastika armbands. There was a law that was introduced which personally affected me. Jewish kids had to be taught in separate classrooms from the German kids. All of a sudden I was cut off from my teacher who I loved and all of my school friends, including Gretty. When I went to school, I now had to go in through a different door and into a new classroom with a new teacher. Our whole entire world had been turned upside down. There were lots of restrictions put in place for Jews. For instance, we weren't allowed to go out to the cinema or sit on a park bench. All that were your friend weren't your friend anymore, and the atmosphere was of terrible fear. In the autumn of 1938 there was the most horrible night of violence, which we now call Crystal Night, which means the night of the broken glass. In every town throughout Austria and Germany, synagogues were burned down. All the shops that were owned by Jews were smashed up and looted, and the homes of Jews were broken into. The worst thing that happened was that thousands of Jewish men were arrested and then taken to concentration camps. One of the men arrested was my dad, and I will never ever forget the sound of Nazi boots going up our stairs and the battering on the door. I was absolutely terrified. After a few weeks, my father was released, but the experience just made my parents desperately search for a safe place to go. They heard about this organisation which was called Children's Transport, which was set up so that Jewish kids could be taken to England as temporary refugees. My parents were told by our doctor that he knew a couple in England who said that they were willing to foster children, and they put my name on the list. When my parents told me, I was devastated. I was just a child, I'd never been away from home, and now I was going to be travelling to stay with strangers in a strange country who spoke a different language. I was only 9, and things had become so frightening that I knew I had to go. My parents received a letter telling them of my departure day, which was the 20th of June, and it said to only bring a small suitcase. We packed a few belongings into the small suitcase that my mother had found. We packed some underwear, a skirt and blouse, a dress, and my blonde doll, some pictures of my parents, my autograph book, and some of my favourite reading books. My father had been arrested again, and he was in a police prison in Vienna. My mother took me to see him the day before I left for England. He looked different to the man I'd known as a child. He was always a very smart man, but now he looked really sad and unshaven. I can't remember everything he said to me, but I do remember him embracing me tenderly and wishing me a safe journey. At the train station, me and my mother kept to the rules we'd been given about no emotional farewells. I embraced my mother for the very last time. Then I climbed into one of the compartments on the train. As I did, suddenly there was a huge commotion and lots of people rushed to the windows. Parents were disobeying orders because they had been told that they weren't allowed to follow their children onto the platform. However, they did, allowing the children to wave goodbye for one last time. I anxiously searched the sea of faces, hoping that I would catch one more glimpse of my mother, but there were no sign of her anywhere. When we arrived in London, we had to wait in a big room until our names were called, and we met the people who were going to take care of us. When I met my foster mother, she took me to her home, which was in Bow in East London. All I remember is waking up the next day feeling very homesick. My foster mother tried everything she could to comfort me. Everything was so much different in England. At home we lived in a flat, now I was living in a house. I'd never had English tea before, and the food in England was different to the food I was used to back home, and I had to speak English. Later on that year, the British government ordered that all the school children in London had to be evacuated to the country. This was because they were sure that London would be targeted by German bombers. My foster mother decided that she would evacuate us both to Paynton in Devon. Once we got ourselves settled in, my foster mother enrolled me in the local primary school. I'd learned a bit of English before I left Austria, but not enough for me to fully understand what people were saying to me. When I was at school or when I was playing with the other kids, this led to some quite funny misunderstandings. Some of the other kids even thought that I was a German spy. I came to England at the age of 9, and the war ended when I was 15. I hadn't heard anything from my parents in 5 years, and I was really scared of finding out what had happened to them. I very sadly learned that my parents, along with my grandmothers, aunts, uncles and cousins, along with millions of other Jews, had all been murdered in the gas chambers of Hitler's concentration camps. I had nothing to go back to Austria for, so I decided to continue living in England with my foster mother until I got married. After I graduated from university, I worked as an English teacher for 25 years. Since my retirement, I've written a book all about my experiences. I've also been to many schools and told the pupils my story. The end. Thank you.